And welcome to this joint event of the Steve Biko Center for Bioethics, the Hospice Palliative Care Association, and the Wits School of Public Health. My name is Letitia Riskel. I'm the head of the School of Public Health here at Wits, and I'm also on the advisory board of the Steve Biko Center for Bioethics. I'll be facilitating the session this evening. We have a very interesting evening ahead of us, so I want to start straight away. And I'm going to call Professor Mac Lukele, who's the head of the School of Clinical Medicine, my colleague on the deanery. Professor Lukele is also an orthopedic surgeon, and in his previous life he was very involved in the South African Medical Association. Just to say that this event, we actually, Professor Dai and I had planned last year already. In fact, it's a continuation of a discussion that we had at the time of the World Medical Association conference in Durban, which on the 6th of September last year, we had an initial discussion where we had Professor van der Gaal from the Netherlands that came and gave us the experience of the legal status of euthanasia in the Netherlands. And at the time, there was such a huge interest in September last year that we thought we'll continue the discussion this year. And of course, the events of the last few weeks have just given prominence once again to the event that we organized tonight. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Prof. Kelly.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Professor Riskel. Colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the Faculty of Health Sciences, specifically on behalf of the Steve Biko Center for Bioethics under the leadership of Professor Ames Dye, and the Hospice Palliative Care Association under the leadership of Liz Weyer, and on behalf of the School of Public Health under the leadership of Professor Riskel, I'd like to welcome you to this evening symposium on reflections on end-of-life decisions. Colleagues, you'll all agree with me that it came at the most appropriate time that we have this symposium this evening. Given what Professor Riskel is saying, it has been in planning for some time, but somehow, given the recent High Court rulings and more applications which are still going to be following, and given the confusion it is causing on the ground amongst us healthcare workers, but not only us healthcare workers, it's also causing confusion amongst families, it's causing confusion amongst religious leaders, and it's even causing confusions among the legal fraternity itself, because no doubt that it should go ending up at the Supreme Court. Colleagues, I'd like to make a special mention of a few people. Our Dean, Professor Martin Rala, thank you very much. Professor Sam Hoko, the current chairperson, the current president of the Health Professional Council. Professor Hoko will also be joining the panel discussion later. Dr. Khodom Sukisi, the chairperson of SAMA, he should be coming in soon. He'll also be joining the panel discussion. A special welcome to our guest speakers, Professor Landman, thank you very much for agreeing. Dr. Nonhlanhla Jamlan Makaya, she's the Chief Nursing Officer for the South African National Department of Health. I must mention here that she taught Professor Ames Dye how to deliver babies. Also, I'd like to make a special mention to Professor Dan Nainyane, who is best known to us as the editor of the South African Medical Journal for the past 20 years, more than 20 years. I have mentioned Dr. Liz Meyer, And I also like to make a special mention on Professor David McQueen-Manson, the chairperson and the acting director of the Center for Social Legal Studies at the University of KwaZulu-Natal. Also, colleagues, I'd like to make a special welcome to all of you who took your time to be here to interact in this debate. With that, I'd like to give the mic back to Professor Lesper.
So just maybe in terms of the procedure for the evening, I'm going to introduce each speaker briefly before they come. We'll pretty much follow the program. After that, I'm going to invite all of them to sit here in front, including Prof. Mohokong and Prof. Krotbom, and we'll then open the floor for questions from the audience. So the first speaker I would like to welcome to the podium is Professor Willem Landman, who's an Executive Committee member of Dignity South Africa. He's currently a non-executive director of the Ethics Institute of South Africa, a position which he's held since 2014, and is also Professor Extraordinaire of Philosophy at the University of Stellenbosch. He has numerous positions, both as Professor and Chair of the Department of Philosophy at the University of the Western Cape, Professor of the Department of Medical Humanities at Brody School of Medicine. He asked me not to labor too much so that he has an extra couple of minutes for his presentation. But just to conclude by saying that Professor Landman has numerous academic and popular publications, including co-editor of the Bioethics Reader Editor's Choice, published by Blackwell Oxford in 2007. He's also the co-founder and co-editor of the International Bioethics Journal, Developing World Bioethics, and has co-authored End-of-Life Decisions, Ethics and the Law, a case for statutory legal clarity and reform in South Africa. Professor Landman, we look forward to your presentation. I should just, I'm a very friendly chair, but if we're going to have time for questions, I'm quite strict with time, but I'll do it in a very nice way. So, welcome, Professor Landman.
Thank you very much for the introduction. Can you hear me at the back? Thank you very much. I have my watch at 6 minutes past. Thank you very much for the invitation. It's a singular honor for you. I'm probably one of the few people, if not the only one, who knew Steve Biko. Well, I spent one evening with you when we were student leaders. We had a bottle of red wine together. And for that, I was labeled enemy of the folk by the Chancellor of the University of Stellenbosch, none other than P.W. Botha. I have very fond memories of an evening with him, what was it, 43 years ago. I want to say that I don't come glibly to this topic. 50 years ago, I was first confronted with what I found to be inexplicable and excruciating suffering as a young boy. And I thought that was not right. I made end-of-life decisions a part of my studies at Oxford, going back 42 years. My first peer-reviewed article was on the moral equivalence of active and passive euthanasia 35 years ago. And then I saw David McCoy Mason 20 years ago in a TV studio debating end-of-life decisions or euthanasia specifically. And 17 years ago I contributed to the South African Law Commission report, and I'm sad to say nothing has really happened since then. So it's a topic that's dear to my heart, but obviously I need to present you with arguments for my position. I want to suggest to you, first of all, I apologize for the busy slides, but I believe they were sent to the media and I would have reduced them, but I didn't do that. We have many personal, religious, cultural differences of belief and persuasion. But in this debate, when we talk about law reform, public policy, the ultimate authority is the Constitution. So we need to discuss this as citizens and not as people with different personal beliefs. Otherwise, we'll be all over the place. But as you'll see, I believe that the public debate is going all over the place. To a large extent, due to what the position that the Minister of Health has taken. My problem with that is that he fails to acknowledge the authority of the Constitution in this debate. And the ruling and the reasons for the ruling and the authorities behind that ruling and the orders that he gave. Now, let us just get terminology straight. Now, I know the topic is end-of-life decisions. And ideally speaking, we should have talked about them all systematically, but I will introduce all of them as I go along. The South African Law Commission report did deal with all of them. Controversially, people think that it only dealt with assisted dying, namely assisted suicide and voluntary active euthanasia. But no, it didn't. It talked about pain management, withholding and withdrawal of life-sustaining treatment, advanced directives, both the living will and a durable healthcare power of attorney, and then controversially in the last section, assisted dying in its two forms. So, but I'm going to focus, because of the court case and my involvement in that, on the last two, active euthanasia and assisted suicide. The difference is up there. Assisted suicide is when the medical practitioner prescribes the means that causes death, and the patient self-administers. Voluntary active euthanasia is when the medical practitioner both supplies and administers the means. Now, just something about, that is somebody's memory seems stopped. In the court case, what motivated us? Underlying ethical values and virtues, character traits that people who care and who show solidarity have. And then, of course, constitutional rights. And I think we should tonight acknowledge Dr. Albie Hartman, 1975, found guilty of murder for assisting his father. What did Judge Louis van Vincent do? He sentenced him to 1 year in prison because he was found guilty of a common law crime. But he sentenced him, he suspended his sentence until the rising of the court. That meant that as soon as Judge van Vincent left the courtroom, Dr. Hartman was free to go. In a sense, he wasn't free, because by one Dr. Steyman from the medical board, he was persecuted. What happened in that case? Why did Judge van Vincent found such sympathy for Dr. Hartman? Because of certain underlying ethical values. Certain values that said that this is just not murder, plain and simple, straightforwardly. And I think what happened in the Constitution is that we have those values enshrined in the Constitution, fundamental ethical values. Because the Constitution is ultimately an ethical document. So that we can now appeal to those rights, which are giving expression to those underlying values, and say we must revisit the common law. Of course, we have this South African Law Commission report. It was ignored for 17 years. And we now hear from the Ministry of Justice and Correctional Services that they never had the intention to look at that. It was never really open for public discussion. Even though for the second report there were two, it was based on extensive public inputs. What is the effect of the Fabricius ruling? First of all, the order related to the specific applicant. He could solicit the assistance of a medical practitioner to either have assisted dying in either of its two forms. But there are orders with general application. And the judge found in that busy, if you look at that busy slide, that common law and the Constitution, the rights of the Constitution are in conflict. Any person, on the basis of his ruling can now approach a court. But its ruling, as you see in the first, the top bullet, was specific on to the facts of this case. So every new applicant will have to produce the facts that are specific to that case. In that sense, it is the order has limited effect. But crucially, he established a cause of action to approach the court, which had not existed before. So the law has already changed, and it's now up to the Constitutional Court to endorse that change or to revert to the previous position. Now, in this debate, there are points of sincere disagreement, and I list some of them there. Balancing the right to dignity and the right to life, are they intertwined? How do we weigh them? Freedom of choice. What are doctors' duties when it comes to death? And escorting people, ushering people into death. Whether suicide should be a personal matter. I hear this surprising argument repeatedly in public discussion. It's a private thing. Why don't you just go off and commit suicide? Maybe we get back to that argument. Possible abuses of vulnerable patients, access by the poor, effectiveness of safeguards, palliative care, I'll come to that, and the relevance of God's will. The question is, are we going to base our discussion on the Constitution, on the ruling and the reasons given and the authorities referred to in those reasons? What will be the standard of our public debate? I'm going to look at a number of arguments and I'll try to go through them pretty quickly. I think the first two are the ones that I see coming up most frequently. And the main spokesperson for these arguments has been the Minister of Health. He said the following: doctors are not to be looked upon as people who kill. They can kill any time, but they don't do so because not killing is embedded in their minds. They should provide palliative care. Now, I can be mischievous and I'll leave out the first bullet, also as a matter of time, but what is the real issue here? The issue is, what are the duties, professional duties of healthcare professionals, this is doctors, who are the ones who can prescribe the means for assisted dying. What are their duties when life is at the end? If dying is a part of life, if dying closes the circle of life, what are the duties of doctors? I want to suggest to you that we have practices that are perfectly legal, that are practiced in hospitals all the time, that are life and death decisions, that involve life and death decisions, in the sense that those decisions determine the manner and the time of death. Think of withholding treatment. Not just life support machines, antibiotics, any kind of treatment. Bypass surgery. Saying, this is a candidate who can undergo that surgery, this one can't. Terminating treatment, in other words, withdrawal, and pain management. All of these are practices that, within the limitations of resources, these are practices that, in terms of which we make decisions all the time. Now, when it comes to palliative care, there's much, we have a next speaker who will talk about that. But what did the judge say? Now, I personally think, of course, that's the baseline. That's the first position. It's non-negotiable. Yet it may be limited by free choice. For some, there may arrive a time when they do not, they say, I've had enough palliative treatment. What did the judge say? It's not for the state to say we should choose other options, such as palliative care, since we have constitutional rights to dignity, and dignity encompasses one's own conception of how to cease to live. And he referred to the famous part of the Canada case of 6 February of this year. Now, the fact that palliative care is not optimal in our mainly public hospitals then, is no excuse for denial of constitutional rights. It's a commentary on the poor healthcare system. It says no one shall have it or anything before everyone can have it. On that score, why do we have any advanced medicine? Why do we have any specialist interventions in people's lives? I dare say also that the rules that are proposed, the safeguards that are proposed for assisted dying in its two forms, are stricter than the informal rules that are being applied for withholding and withdrawal of treatment and for pain management that shortens life. Those rules that are proposed are stricter. We are dealing with life and death decisions in a manner that where often I find that doctors don't feel that they do not have enough protection. The South African Law Commission report of 1998 wanted to address that situation by talking about pain management, withholding and withdrawal of treatment, advanced directives. Shall we listen to a living will or not? So I think that, yes, I can, 5 minutes. I think that we have an informal situation where we discuss life and death, which is less controlled than the proposals on the table with the safeguards that are tested, have been tested in other regimes. Okay. Now, abuse arguments, there are many of them. They basically say that if we legalize this practice, there will be abuses, there will be bad consequences that we will not be able to control. Take note that this is not a principled argument, and in theory, people who advance this argument will say, if the abuses are not taking place, do not take place, then I have no principled objection to assisted dying. What does the minister say? Potential rise in fraud and unethical behavior amongst doctors. Unscrupulous families can collude with doctors to end life, to cash in insurance policies, and so on and so forth. I want to say, save us from our doctors. Save us from our families who want to kill us. What is the evidence for this? Look at the regimes where this has been properly managed, overseen, monitored, and reported on for over 20 years, like Oregon. Accepted by the Supreme Court of Canada, precisely for that reason. 22 years ago, they rejected legalizing it, assisted dying, with a vote of 5 against 4. Now it was 9-0 unanimous because of this type of argument. So it lacks credible evidence. It does not interrogate the effectiveness of safeguards. And I think making law on the basis of exceptions is bad. 3.5 minutes. Doing God's will. The minister says doctors should not have the right to end a person's life because they are not God. And only God decides when a person dies. Now, I need not dwell on this argument. Law is not made on the basis of interpreting God's will, but on the basis of interpreting the Constitution. In any event, which religion and which interpretation of a specific religion. But I want to say this, that there are Christian scholars and clergy and believers who believe differently. That, in my view, that God's grace, the grace of a loving God, and our responsibility for others would be embraced by the grace of God. We blame God in many other ways. If blame God means we decide the manner and time of death, then all those other practices that are perfectly legal do exactly the same. But there's a deafening silence about this. People do not want to engage with this argument. I don't know why. 2 minutes. The right to life. A lot of talk about that. The Minister of Health has his interpretation of that. We may come back to that argument that is absolute, that is unqualified, etc. It cannot be, because we kill in self-defense. With state sanction in a time of war, we can terminate pregnancies. So the right to life is the right not to be killed, and we may waive that right. And the right to life, as Judge Peter Reagan said, is entwined with the right to dignity. That life can be so devoid of dignity that the right to life dissipates. There's a last quote there from the task, but let me move on. I'm almost at the end, but this thing's taking 10 seconds. Okay. Then the last slide with a few arguments. What about the poor being excluded? I'm not going to have much time for this. All I'm going to say is that we as Dignity South Africa could have been approached by anyone. That I think the court ruling paves the way for everybody, including the poor. No, as any rule and regulation in this country is colorblind, does not discriminate, the same would apply here. Then, quickly, other arguments. Commit suicide on your own, cruel and inhuman. Accept as inevitable suffering. But why do we want to stop suffering throughout our lives? But when it comes to the end, no, then we back off. If that is, none of us has been there and back. None of us has had a trial run. We'll all have to go through it unless we die suddenly, lucky enough to die suddenly. We all have to negotiate that suffering. I think it's incredibly cruel to say that. And then a point that David will come back to, the equivalence of active and passive euthanasia. If you look at all the variables, the practices, so-called passive euthanasia versus active euthanasia, there are no differences between the two. The Hippocratic Oath says, amongst others, who are the teachers here in the faculty? The original oath says that the students will look after their teachers in perpetuity. So you don't have to worry. But why don't we include that no longer include that in the oath? What I'm saying is the oath is not immutable. It has to be interpreted. And then, concluding remark, I can suffice with that. Perhaps just the right to dignity. I see the Minister of Health speculates about that. What did the lawmakers with the writers of the Constitution mean in 1996? What did President Mandela mean? I dare say that if President Mandela knew how we lived in the last 6 months, you would see this as the assault on his dignity. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Landman. I also see that you squeezed those last 5 minutes. You know, it's called a stretched 5 minutes. Our next speaker is Dr. Nonhlanhla Makhanya, who's the inaugural Chief Nursing Officer of the Republic of South Africa, and with responsibility for overseeing nursing and midwifery services and assisting government to achieve the population health needs of the country. Prior to that, Dr. Makhanya worked for the provincial government Department of Health in KwaZulu-Natal as a head of ministry, which was an advisory portfolio to the provincial Ministry of Health. She was also the president of the South African Nursing Council between 2004 and 2008, and the chairperson of the same council between 2008 and 2013. Dr. Makhanya has worked in various settings within the health sector, and her experience stretches from providing clinical nursing right through to being the head of nursing at a university department. Dr. Makhanya will be speaking to the topic on a nurse's perspective.
Program Director, ladies and gentlemen, all protocol observed. It is a great pleasure for me to be part of this very sensitive yet quite a significant part of our interaction with our patients. I need to declare upfront that my presentation is a presentation that is based on my identity as a nurse within the South African context. And I'm quite happy and privileged I'm quite excited that the organizers of this meeting realize the role of the nurse in the interaction with our patients, things that we take for granted. We know that there are so many health professionals. However, when we look into two critical stages of life, quite often, a nurse is the first person that makes a contact at the beginning of life, during delivery, and in most instances, where end of life happens within a healthcare facility, a nurse is almost the last human being that makes a contact with whoever has been a beneficiary of our health services. So colleagues, I think for me it's quite important to sort of preamble my presentation, because I'm actually going to advance the role and the responsibilities of a nurse during the end of life decisions. And the responsibilities of a nurse are actually based on the legislative framework. And the legislative framework happens locally, it happens at an international level. And locally, it's influenced by the critical stakeholders within the health sector. And key amongst those is the health sector workforce, is the education system, the regulatory framework, and the professional bodies. And in the context of end-of-life decisions, professional regulators actually set standards of care that have to be observed by all nurses registered within the South African context. And professional bodies become advocates of what kind of care, nursing care, is expected from the interest groups that they represent. And in this regard, the Palliative Care Association becomes the key professional body that would interact with to understand better the service and nursing interventions that are required by patients that are receiving palliative care. And at a national level, as a nursing profession, we subscribe to international and national legislative frameworks and principles that guide the nursing practice. Specific to the topic today, one key resolution is the resolution of the World Health Assembly on palliative care, a resolution of 2014. And central to that resolution was the need to strengthen that government must develop policies that are going to strengthen health systems so that a health system become responsive to all health needs of everybody that enter our system. And the second aspect of the resolution was that health professionals must be able to provide palliative care. And if you look from that resolution, there's been a number of national policies. The strategic plan on HIV and AIDS, for instance, has quite a significant chunk in terms of how to assist people that are coming towards an end of life, and particularly in terms of how do we deal with pain that is often associated with that stage. And as we are quite aware of the burden within the health system, the burden that is brought by the increase in the burden of disease, we realize that our health system is actually struggling to cope with the demand. And this is why there is a very active and conscious move to decentralize and take health to communities. And there is an approach which actually phrased as re-engineered primary health care, but in essence it says let's go back to basics and bringing health to the close level of healthcare providers. And across the spectrum of care, there is accommodation for all levels of care as required by our healthcare users. Specific to the competencies for professional nurse, for professional nurses. Again, practice of nursing is also guided by legal framework, the ethical practice, and accountability. And these are some of the professional values that are central to nursing. And I've deliberately located them within this phrase which I got from our contacts on the 12th of May as we're celebrating the International Nurses Day. And this was to say nurses are the heart of the healthcare. And as nurses being central to the healthcare services, there are these key central values which are regarded as the measures of excellence of care that are often used by patients to actually evaluate the kind of care that they receive from nursing. Patients expect nurses to be competent, to be caring, to be compassionate, to be able to communicate and have commitment and courage. The care component, the care is the essence of the core business of nursing. It is actually what distinguishes nursing from other healthcare professional members. People receive care, the people who receive care expect it to be right for them consistently, holistically, and throughout their lifespan. And in the context of the care that is given to palliative, in the context of palliative care, this care is provided through a care modality which is integrated clinical service management model of managed care that provides for integration of prevention, treatment, and care of all chronic patients. And this happens at the various levels of care, from primary health care. It also ensures seamless transition to assisted self-managed care within the community. It is patient-centered, and it encompasses the full value chain of continuum of care and support in line with the principles of palliative care. The second expectation of our patients is that nurses be competent. Be competent in the three areas of competence as defined by the Charter for Nursing Practice. And these areas is professional and ethical care that is required for all people who are providing care. And we need to be able to understand an individual's health and social needs and be able to have expertise in the clinical and technological knowledge to be able to deliver effective care and treatment based on research and evidence. And more importantly, the third area of competence is about quality of care. And this is quality of care throughout the continuum of care using palliative care frameworks. And the other professional value is compassion, and this defines the relationships that we build with our patients, the relationships based on respect, sympathy, and dignity. And this is a kind of a value system that is often described as intelligent kindness and is central to how patients perceive their care. And commitment to enhance quality of life of every person